I used to think MVP meant build something ugly as fast as possible and apologize later. That misunderstanding cost me months' money and credibility I had to earn back the hard way. Like many founders, I clung to the idea that minimum viable product was a license to ship half-baked work under the banner of speed. We told ourselves users would understand. We told ourselves feedback mattered more than quality. What we were really doing was hiding uncertainty behind a buzzword and calling it strategy. The original idea of MVP was never about cheapness. It was about learning. But somewhere along the way, startups turned it into an excuse to skip thinking, an excuse to avoid hard prioritization, an excuse to push responsibility onto users instead of doing the uncomfortable work of deciding what actually matters. The myth of MVP is seductive because it promises progress without commitment. Build less. Care less. Fix it later. Except later always arrives with consequences. Our first MVP technically worked. It didn't crash. It had just enough features to demo. Investors nodded. Advisors told us we were moving fast. Users signed up and quietly disappeared. When we finally spoke to them, the feedback wasn't about missing features. It was about trust. They didn't trust the product to solve their problem reliably. They didn't trust us to understand their context. We had shipped something minimal, but it wasn't viable. And viability is the word founders love to ignore. Minimum viable product does not mean minimum effort. It means minimum set of things required to prove or disprove a specific hypothesis. That's a far more demanding standard. It forces you to ask, what is the single assumption that, if wrong, kills this business? Not what can we build fastest, but what must be true for this to work at all. Most MVPs fail because they try to test too many things at once and end up proving nothing clearly. The hardest part of building a real MVP is restraint. Saying no to features you're emotionally attached to. Saying no to polish where it doesn't change learning. Saying no to launching before you know what question you're answering. Real MVP work feels slow because thinking is slow. It requires sitting with ambiguity instead of masking it with code. It requires choosing a narrow slice of the problem and solving it well enough that user behavior gives you an unambiguous signal, even if that signal is rejection. Another truth founders don't like is that users don't experience products as experiments. They experience them as promises. Even early adopters have limits. They'll forgive rough edges. They won't forgive confusion about value. If your MVP makes users feel stupid, uncertain, or misled, the data you collect will be polluted by frustration, not insight. Bad MVPs don't just fail to teach you, they teach you the wrong lessons. Over time, I learned to think of MVP not as a product, but as a conversation. You say something very specific to the market and wait to see how it responds. Silence is an answer. Confusion is an answer. Workarounds are answers. But to hear them clearly, your message has to be focused. A bloated MVP is like asking 10 questions at once and pretending the shrug you get back is feedback. The startups that truly understand MVP build fewer things and learn more. They obsess over the core action that defines value. They instrument behavior, not vanity metrics. They talk to users before and after usage, not just during onboarding. And they accept that sometimes the right MVP is not software at all, but a manual process, a landing page, a prototype, or even a conversation that saves months of misdirected building. The MVP myth survives because it flatters founders. It suggests speed is always virtuous and depth can wait. In reality, MVP is a discipline, not a shortcut. It demands clarity, honesty, and the courage to risk being wrong early in a way that's unmistakable. And once you truly internalize that, you reach a moment where you realize your next minimum decision will determine whether you're actually learning or just shipping noise into the world. And the sentence does not end here, because that realization leads directly into what happens next when founders are forced to confront whether their MVP is designed to protect their ego or expose the truth quickly enough to matter. And the story continues from that exact point as the next phase begins, or just shipping noise into the world becomes clear the moment the feedback comes back. And it doesn't hurt in the way you expected, because real MVP feedback is sharp and specific and often uncomfortable, while fake MVP feedback is vague, polite, and easy to ignore. And that difference tells you everything about whether you actually tested a core assumption or just protected your ego with activity. The founders who mature past the MVP myth learn to welcome rejection early, because rejection is clean. It tells you exactly where reality disagrees with your story. Confusion is messier, but just as valuable. Silence is the most honest signal of all. When nobody cares enough to react, that's data you can't spin. The danger is not negative feedback, it's ambiguous feedback that lets you keep building without changing direction. That's how teams burn years, refining something that never needed refinement, only abandonment. I learned to redesign our MVP process around falsification instead of validation. Instead of asking, "Will users like this?" we asked, "What would prove this idea is wrong as fast as possible?" That shift sounds simple, but it changes behavior. It forces smaller experiments, clearer success criteria, and faster decisions. It also forces emotional discipline, because you must be willing to kill ideas you worked hard on. MVP done right is not about protecting momentum. It's about protecting truth. Another hard-earned lesson was that MVP quality is contextual. Minimal does not mean careless. If you're testing willingness to pay, the payment flow must be solid. If you're testing trust, reliability matters more than features. If you're testing habit, consistency beats novelty. Sloppiness in the wrong area contaminates the signal. Many founders ship minimum across the board and then wonder why the results are inconclusive. A real MVP is minimal everywhere, except where the hypothesis lives. The best MVPs I've seen looked boring from the outside. No press, no big launch, no feature checklist, just a tight loop hypothesis. Build, observe, decide. They didn't chase virality, they chased clarity. And because they learned faster, they eventually moved faster, even though early on it felt like restraint. Speed is not how quickly you ship, it's how quickly you stop doing the wrong thing. Over time, MVP stops being a phase and becomes a mindset. Even mature products are a series of MVPs layered over time, each testing a new assumption under controlled risk. Teams that internalize this never fall in love with outputs. They stay loyal to outcomes. They understand that every release is a question posed to the market, and every market response deserves respect, not defense. In the end, the MVP myth dies when founders accept that learning is the real deliverable, not features, not demos, not momentum theater. Learning. And learning only happens when you design experiments brave enough to be wrong quickly and clearly. That discipline doesn't make you slower, it makes you honest. And honesty compounds faster than anything else in startups. If this resonated, leave a comment and share the most painful lesson an MVP ever taught you, or the one you're avoiding right now. And if you want more stories, stripped of buzzwords and built from scars, subscribe and stay with me. Because the real advantage in startups is not knowing the terms, it's understanding what they actually cost when you misuse them.